In Module 4, we will start introduction about classes and objects. We will really start talking about the object-oriented concept. In the textbook, you will refer to Chapter 9. In the first few weeks, we talk about selection and other program control about the loop and write a method in Java. But for those things is basically the concept is about the programming control. So that's the traditional procedure programming concept. However, in Java, there are pure object-oriented concept. So that's why you can see whenever we want to write a program, we will have a main method in the Java file. And also each Java file is a class file. So that's what we'll start talking about what it is the object-oriented concept. So you can see every Java file is a class, but we only write that class and we have a static main method to run the program. We didn't create any object yet. So that's why in this week, we will really start talking about the object-oriented concept. So simply to say object-oriented concept, we need to create a class. And the class can be a data type. So from the same class, we can create same data type object. So we will learn how to define a class and how to create object in this class. This week, we will talk about simple example, create different classes. So then we'll show you how to create the object. When you define a class, you need to understand what is the instance, variable, and the method. Then we will compare what are different between the instance, variable, and the static variable. And also we will talk about more keyword before we talk about public, and also we will talk about the private keyword in this week. And also in class, we use this keyword a lot in Java and C++. So we will see what's different. Since we create an object, so last week we talked about the Java method. Since we have object now, we can pass in the array through the method or return array from the method. Array actually is one kind of object. So the same thing we can pass object through the method. We can return object through the method. So then we will see how to store and process object. So let's start talking about the introduction about object-oriented programming. So object-oriented programming enables you to develop large-scale software and the GUI effectively. So here the GUI is, we say, the graphic user interface. So after the midterm exam, we will start using Java FX. So then we will create different GUI components in our GUI. So you can see that's a button, that's a label, that's a text field. So we have checkbox and the radio button and the combo box. But here I show you all different kind of what you see the GUI component. Actually, they are all an object. And also before we create those objects, we create and define different classes. So we have button class, we have label class, we have text field combo box class. When you solve the programming problem, we learn different ways to solve the programming problem. But when we talk about if-else statement, for loop, while loop, or Java method or array, those is the common programming skill and programming control we can use in the programming in our source file to solve the problem. But those things actually can be in C++ for the procedure programming, but also they can be in the object-oriented concept. So this chapter we will start introduce object-oriented programming. So then you can see how to define a class and using create the object. And also after the midterm exam, you can see we use that a lot in our GUI. So we talk about so much about object-oriented concept. So what is object-oriented concept start? So the first thing, you need to define classes for object. So each class actually defines the property and the behavior for different objects. Object-oriented programming involves programming using object. So an object actually represents an entity in the real world that can be distinctly identified. What does that mean? Actually, you are a student. Actually, student is an object. You are using your desk to work on your homework. A desk is an object. A circle, a button. Even we talk about the loan process, or you create a saving account, checking account, those each individual thing, they can say that's an object. On the other word, you can see anything in the real world is an object. So now I just want to post the video. You can see in your room now, okay, actually anything you want to pick up, that's an object. An object has unique identity, state, and behavior. So for example, we say a chair you are sitting on now. That's an object. And your chair have their color, have their weight, have their length and width or height. So that we say they have the unique identity. So they can have the weight and the height, that's their identity. And also they have different brand. And also you see your chair can handle specific weight. So your chair can adjust the height. So that's we call that a behavior. So that's why everything in the real world is an object. So that's why we introduce a new way to implement the programming. That's we call the object-oriented programming. In Java, is the specific example is pure object-oriented concept. So that's why you can see any Java file implement is a class. C++ you learned before actually is half and half. C++ can be a procedure programming and also can be an object-oriented programming. So after you understand object in real world, everything is object, right? So that's why, did you think about your object X being created? Like earlier I said, the chair you are sitting on, they have different brand. Actually, different manufacturer, they will create that different kind of chair. So before we need to produce that chair, so the first thing we need to define class. So the state of an object, that we call either property or attribute. So they are represented in the programming world. We say that's a data field. So the data field will be with their current value. What does that mean? For example, we say the chair you are sitting on, right? So they have their height, they have their weight. So that's a specific data field with specific value associated with that chair. Then the next one, we will see the circle example. So we're using the circle. Yeah, everyone knows circle, right? So I told you a circle. What you will think about circle? Right, circle, they have their radius. So then from that radius, we can draw a circle. So from that radius, we can calculate the circle have the circumference and the area. So that's right. You see, different circle, they have different radius. So you see, radius actually is identify how this circle is. So that's we will have the radius is a data field for the circle. So with that data field for the radius, actually is the property characterize this circle. Your radius 5, your radius 6, your radius 10, you have different area. So then, right, that thing you need to be careful. When we start define a class, so this class we will think about they will have their data field. So the data field actually is privately to identify this object. Okay, then Different objects, they also have their behavior, or sometimes we say action. So in the programming world, we will define those behavior as the method. So for example, if your chair can adjust the height, so then I just have the adjust height method I define in the chair class. So then the same thing for the circle. The circle radius can identify a circle. So then we know after we have a circle, we may want to know the area. We may want to know the parameter. Also here we can either say parameter or circumference. So then those area and the circumference, if we want to get, we will write a method as get area or get parameter. So in that get area, we will calculate the circle area is pi r squared. So those thing is the method. So you can see here, when we want to define a class, we need to think about this class when we create as object, what data field they have. Then we will define a variable for that. What kind of behavior they have. So then we will define method in the class. So to summarize the definition and the class and the object. Object actually came from the same data type defined using a common class. So a class actually is the template, blueprint, or the contract that's defined what an object's data field and the method will be. So that's why when you create a class, you can create the object. So when we say the class like blueprint, I want to build a house. So I want to define the class how the house will build. So then I create the house property. For example, you guys all love car. When we want to produce Tesla car, S model or different model, they need to define those model, how their blueprint about different component, different feature they want to provide. So that's why they need to define first. So then they can put in the manufacture line. So then you will see each Tesla car. And also a lot of time we even say the class, you can think about just like recipe. You want to make an apple pie. Then you will find the recipe first using that recipe. But the recipe itself is not an apple pie. Until you put all the ingredients, then you become an apple pie. So that's the difference between class and object. Class, honestly, is just a definition, a template, blueprint, or contract. Then not wait until you put all the ingredients, then we become the object. In C++ or Java, when we create a class, we always using the variable to define the data field. Then to describe the action or behavior for a class, we write a method. So here we have the special method. We call the constructor method. So this constructor method can perform any action, but the most important thing is how to initialize the data field in the object. So the next example, we'll see how should we start define our first class called circle. Before I start showing the circle class implementation, I want you to know this one is we call the UML notation. In this class, whenever I want you to define a class, I will give you a UML notation that we call the Unified Modeling Language. In the UML diagram, we have three different things. First, 1, 2, 3. So on the top will be the class name. The second part is the data field. Then the third part is all the method. So the method including the constructor method and the regular method. So when you have your data field, the first thing we have the variable name, then comma data type. When we have the method, the first thing we have the method name with the parameter. So the parameter you have data type and the variable name and the data type. So that's UML diagram.